mare com'è bello.
Hi class, today we're going to start talking about Machiavelli, and I want to begin by talking a little bit about why we jump from Plato and Aristotle all the way to Machiavelli, basically a space of several thousand years, leaving out a lot of philosophy that comes in between and a lot of philosophers. And there are two reasons. Right? First, there's obviously the practical reason that we're only in this class for about a month, and in a month, 5 weeks, you just can't read all the things that ought to be read. So there's always difficult choices made about what to include and what not to include. So I then begin to think for myself when I'm designing a syllabus about the various positions that I want to introduce you to in ethics and the sort of the narrative or the story that I want to tell about ethics. So as it happens, Plato and Aristotle, for a variety of reasons, become sort of almost the default positions in philosophy for many centuries, if not millennia, afterwards. Right? Almost every philosopher that you come across in the time between Plato and Aristotle, the time between Plato and Aristotle on the one hand and Machiavelli on the other, could practically be described as some form of Platonist or some form of Aristotelian, and a lot of the debate in the scholarship about these people is about which influence is more pronounced. So whether it's Al-Farabi and Al-Kindi in sort of early medieval Baghdad, or Augustine of Hippo in North Africa, or shooting forward a couple hundred years to Thomas Aquinas in Paris, right? The central debate is always, is this person adapting Platonism or is this person adapting Aristotelianism? Which philosopher, which philosophical movement is sort of more influential on these thinkers? So someone will write a book or an article that, oh, hey, this guy's actually a Platonist, and then someone else will write an article, oh, no, this guy's actually some kind of Aristotelian, and back and forth like that, until you get to Machiavelli. Machiavelli can not be described as either a Platonist or an Aristotelian. He's just Machiavellian. He represents, I would say, a new position in ethics, in thinking about the good life and living together and all of the things that we've been talking about in our class. With Machiavelli, we get a new position that is not Platonist and not Aristotelian, that it is just his own. And Machiavelli knew this. One of the things that you'll notice is that when you read The Prince, which is one of his major works, that Machiavelli often refers to the newness of what he is doing, that he is offering to us something new, and that he's offering a kind of knowledge that has not been available before, right? So if you look at the dedicatory letter, the letter that he writes in the beginning of The Prince to Lorenzo de' Medici, and I'll talk a little bit about the relationship between Machiavelli and the famous Medici family of Florence in a little bit when I sort of get to the historical background. But we see that what Machiavelli has is knowledge of the actions of great men, learned by me from long experience with modern things and a continuous reading of ancient ones. And so one of the things that makes Machiavelli new is his experience with modern things, that part of his knowledge comes from his understanding of what he would call the modern world. And even though Machiavelli lived hundreds of years ago, he's generally considered to be one of the first modern philosophers. And hopefully by the time we finish with Machiavelli, you'll see why. So Machiavelli is offering Lorenzo de' Medici his knowledge, and it's knowledge of the actions of great men. He learned from his own personal experience and a continuous reading of ancient things. And this little book, he says, contains everything that he knows. And he learned this knowledge he came across, he said, with hardships and dangers, right? This is not something that he discovered easily. It's not a kind of knowledge that is there for just anyone to acquire. It's something that is dangerous. Machiavelli is sort of offering us a kind of a dangerous knowledge that it might not be good for you to know, in a way. That while that the knowledge that Machiavelli offers might be a depressing knowledge or a scary knowledge, but a knowledge that is ultimately, if sort of digested and adapted completely, good for you. But he doesn't expect that Lorenzo will sort of take advantage of this knowledge, which is although the book is dedicated to Lorenzo de' Medici, if you know a little bit about Lorenzo, you know that he inherited his throne as basically Duke of Florence from his father, which means that Lorenzo de' Medici is a hereditary prince, the kind of prince discussed in chapter 2 of the book, which means that after chapter 2 is over, Machiavelli is talking to someone else. He's not really talking to Lorenzo de' Medici anymore. He's basically talking to us. And to understand how and why he's talking to us, we have to sort of unpack a couple different words. The first word we need to unpack is prince. All right, because this book takes the form of advice to princes. And you might think to yourself, well, I'm not a prince. I'm not royalty. This book is for princes and princesses, not for, people living in Texas in 2020. Right? You have to understand that by prince, Machiavelli doesn't mean royalty. All he means by prince is leader, right? And if you read a lot of Machiavelli, you'll see him talking about any kind of political or social leader as a prince. So prince doesn't mean royalty. It doesn't mean, Prince Charles and Princess Diana and all those like English clowns running around in their costumes. It means leaders. So anyone that's in a position of leadership in Machiavelli's terminology is a prince. And then when he talks about principalities and states and things like that, he does not necessarily mean organized units of government, although it can include that. It's actually a much broader notion of any sort of enterprise that is led by a prince. So your student organization could be considered a state in Machiavelli's use of the term, or so keep in mind that although Machiavelli is going to be using this, verbiage that is sort of very much rooted in sort of like Renaissance ways of speaking, his ideas go much beyond that, and his intended audience goes much beyond that. It's not a book for Lorenzo de' Medici and princes like him. It's actually a book for, as he puts it in another one of his texts, his other major work, The Discourses on Livy. He says it's for people that should be princes, not necessarily those that are actually princes. People that should be leaders, not necessarily those that actually are our leaders. And so what is it that Machiavelli teaches those people that should be leaders, and what makes him so novel and unique in the history of philosophy that I say that he's really the first person that cannot be described as a Platonist or an Aristotelian? Well, partly you'll come to see why as we go on, but one couple things that you should keep an eye out for, since we just finished with Aristotle, I'll start with there, is the way Machiavelli talks about virtue. Virtue in Machiavelli, that's the virtue translates Machiavelli's Italian virtu, is a very slippery word for him. It does not mean what it means for Aristotle. Virtue does not mean sort of moral excellence in pursuit of, human flourishing, which ultimately includes contemplation of the highest and best things, right? That's sort of Aristotelian virtue. Machiavellian virtue is about effectiveness. It's about getting things done and acquiring what he calls stato, which is like state, or probably a looser but better translation would be power. Right, so for Machiavelli, the goal of virtue is power, not happiness or the good or anything like that. So even though he'll talk about virtue, he talks about it in a way that is radically different than the Aristotelian or even the Platonist tradition would have talked about it. And so you have to pay close attention to his language, because he'll use words taken from traditional moral theory, which is what Plato and Aristotle have become at this point, and twist them and use them in increasingly different ways until you realize he has a completely different understanding of the term. So, for example, Machiavelli will include cruelty as a virtue. This is not something that, Aristotle would have done. Aristotle would never have said that it's virtuous to be cruel. But Machiavelli will say that there is a right way to be cruel. He will say that ultimately the virtuous person knows not only how to be good, not only how to do the right thing at the right time for the right reason, but also how to be bad, how to do the wrong thing at the right time for the right reason. And so pay attention to how Machiavelli uses these terms and twists these terms. There's a sense in which Machiavelli can be thought of as going back to a fork in the road, where Plato and Aristotle turned one direction, and Machiavelli wants to go all the way back and turn the other direction. Because there's a sense in which I think Machiavelli's political and moral philosophy picks up where Thrasymachus's leaves off in Book 1 of the Republic. And you can imagine the prince as giving voice to what Thrasymachus would say to Socrates if he was given the chance. So that's one or two ways of thinking about Machiavelli. So to wrap it up, the prince represents a new approach to ethics, and I'll just close off with a few historical details about Machiavelli. So he lived in Florence in Italy, roughly during the time of the High Renaissance, from 1469 to 1527. He wrote The Prince in 1513 while he was in exile, and he was, prior to him becoming, I guess you could say, a writer, philosopher, what have you, he was a high-level functionary in the Florentine Republic. Like, we often forget that Italy has not always been a single country. For most of its history, between the fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of modern Italy in the 18th century, Italy was made up of many different political organizations, kingdoms, duchies, and most importantly for our reading of Machiavelli, republics. Italy has a strong tradition of republicanism in the sense of obviously not in the sense of the modern day political party, but in the sense of just people electing their leaders and passing their own laws and managing their own affairs rather than being ruled by, a king or what have you, right? The Republic of Venice, we often don't realize this in the United States. We often think that we were like the first republic in history, but at the time of the founding of the United States, the Republic of Venice was about 1,000 years old. And Machiavelli worked in the Republic of Florence, which was basically the city of Florence and its surrounding lands. The city of Florence, while it was ostensibly a republic for some time, was for a couple generations ruled by the very wealthy Medici family. Right, the Medici family gained their wealth as wool merchants, and then they became bankers, and they used their wealth to basically undermine the Republican institutions of Florence by bribes, lobbying, and things like that. That they never formally ended the republic, but all their candidates won all the elections and things like that. Till eventually, the people of Florence rose up, took an opportunity and ran them out of town and sort of refounded a Florentine republic without the Medicis. And this is the republic that Machiavelli worked in as essentially Secretary of State. But the Medicis eventually returned to power and kicked all of the people working for the other republic out of office, and Machiavelli was without a job. Eventually, there was a plot to overthrow the Medicis again that the Medicis found out about, and Machiavelli was named as one of the plotters, one of the people that was involved in this conspiracy. We don't know if he really was. His name just showed up on a list. Whereupon Machiavelli was arrested and tortured and was going to be executed, but then the Medicis decided that rather than executing people, they would put Machiavelli in exile. So Machiavelli went into exile to live in a small farmhouse outside of Florence, and that's where he wrote the Republic. Not the Republic. That's where he wrote The Prince, and he dedicated it to Lorenzo de' Medici as a way of trying to get on their good side so he could go back to the city. Because Machiavelli did not like living in the country. He was a city guy, and he wanted to be where the action was politically and intellectually, artistically, and that meant Florence. And so he was trying to get back on the Medici's good side, so to speak, to get his way back into the city. That said, this is not a pro-Medici book. Machiavelli seems to have, I think he thought that Lorenzo de' Medici was somewhat stupid and would not realize that the book was not really meant for him, even though he was dedicating it to him. So that's a little bit of the historical background on Machiavelli. But with that, I'll let you all go and read The Prince. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great book, even if you don't agree with it. Thinking about why you don't agree with it is always helpful.